In 1931, the Japanese General Staff is training a soldier who will not surrender, a soldier who will die rather than surrender. (1942), the South Pacific. The Japanese military planners have succeeded. The average Japanese soldier believes that if he surrenders, he brings disgrace not only upon his country and himself, but upon his whole family as well. Thus he will fight well, and he will die well. His mind admits no other possibilities. How shall we fight an enemy who will not surrender? We must find another way to fight the forgotten war and destroy the Japanese who will not surrender. There's only one tedious, long plan that may work. Kill the Japanese not with bullets, but with starvation. Here is the Allied plan of battle in the South Pacific. The Japanese supply chain to New Guinea seems vulnerable. We will attempt to blockade all supplies coming over water to New Guinea with sea power and air power. At the same time, the Japanese supply bases on New Guinea will be interdicted by American air power. The first step must be the destruction of the Japanese ground-based air power on New Guinea.
Top secret. Estimate of New Guinea-based Japanese Air Force. There is some misapprehension to the effect that the Japanese Air Force is a third-rate carbon copy of a Western Air Force. The facts are, the Japanese Zero has better high-altitude capabilities, better maneuverability than any plane the Allies own. The Japanese flyers in New Guinea were combat trained in China. They are as good as any group of Western pilots in the air. The Japanese spirit of death before surrender is evidenced by the fact that the Japanese airmen do not wear parachutes. Most serious. The Japanese bombers can operate 2,000 to 10,000 feet above any intercepting planes. Thus, the Japanese can bomb us at will. The American Air Force is operating with obsolescent P-39s and P-40s. Spare parts must be scavenged from wrecked planes. Everything is in short supply.
Shortly after this report was made, a new American fighter plane arrives in the Pacific. The twin-tail P-38, the Lightning, a rugged, fast plane which is supposedly designed to win superiority for the Americans at high altitude. But the P-38 is designed for the European war and must be adapted for South Pacific fighting. There are only a handful of them, not enough to win aerial supremacy unless they are used with the older and more numerous P-40s. The Lightnings are flying top cover. Below the Lightnings are the P-40s, waiting to take on the enemy planes when the Lightnings drive them to middle altitudes. 25,000 feet. The Japanese Air Force aims at Port Moresby. 30,000 feet. The Lightnings dive to the attack. Feet. The American P-40s can complete the kill now that the Japanese planes have been forced down to the middle altitudes. 18,000 feet. Stripped of their fighter protection and driven to low altitudes, the Japanese bombers are vulnerable. "100 feet. With the air above them cleared, the American B-25s can counterattack. They come in at treetop level to strafe the enemy planes on the ground. Wewak, Bunamission, Salamau, Lai, the Japanese cannot control the air, even over their own airstrips. The first line of enemy pilots is rapidly being wiped out or exhausted. The Japanese know that unless they can reinforce these bases, they will have to be abandoned. If the New Guinea offensive is to continue, the airmen of the Emperor must be resupplied. In New Guinea, both sides not only fight each other, they fight for life in a land where civilized man cannot live.
In some parts of New Guinea, you could expect 120 inches of rain a year. You'd go for months without getting dry. The mud gave you trench foot, the stagnant water gave you mildew fungus in the inner ear. Mosquitoes, malaria, dengue fever. But no matter how sick or lonely you were, there was always somebody who was worse off. Because no disease is worse than combat, and nothing hurts more than shrapnel.
Still, the Americans have food and adequate medical supplies. The situation is worse for the Japanese. If the enemy's New Guinea offensive is to continue, the soldiers of the Emperor need help. 400 miles away, in the harbor of Rabaul, Japanese supplies for New Guinea. 400 miles away, everything needed to bolster the faltering attack of the Imperial Army. Message from General Imamuro, Japanese Army Commander, to Admiral Kusaka, Japanese Naval Commander. Request resupply of New Guinea garrison at Lai. Field order from General Imamuro. 7,000 soldiers are ordered to reinforce the Papuan Peninsula of New Guinea by March 3rd, 1943. A Japanese convoy of 16 ships, including 4 warships, leaves New Britain. The Lai resupply convoy departs Rabaul, New Guinea, 28 February 1943. Under the cover of bad weather, it will move through the Bismarck Sea. Under land-based air protection, the convoy will turn into Vitiaya Strait and proceed to Lai. Only one thing can stop the Japanese from reinforcing New Guinea: Allied air power. These are medium bombers, B-25s. They were built to bomb at 12,000 feet. The original idea was that the pilot would control 4 forward-firing machine guns. But in the South Pacific, the rules are thrown away. The bombardier has been eliminated, so the plane can be equipped with up to 14 machine guns firing forward. The high-altitude bomb sight has been thrown away. The oxygen equipment has been thrown away. These planes will fight the battle right down on the deck, just as low as they can get. Before the B-25s reach the battle area, the heavy, high-altitude B-17s prepare for the attack. The enemy ships begin a turning maneuver to spoil the bombardier's aim. The high-altitude attack is only moderately successful. Now the Royal Australian Beauforts and Beaufighters are brought down to the deck. The American B-25s are maneuvered into position. The concentrated low-level attack begins. At the critical moment, 500-pound bombs are skipped into the sides of the Japanese ships. Firepower of the land-based aircraft is devastating. Of 16 ships, 12 will be beached or sunk. But the battle against Japanese supply is not over. The Allied planes bear inland, searching out the remnants of the enemy's materiel. The techniques that worked at masthead level will work at palm tree height. Fragmentation bombs attached to parachutes. delayed action bombs. Rotting in the holds of the Japanese ships are supplies that will never reach their troops. Although the campaign in the South Pacific is far from over, Japanese offensive hopes lie broken on the water's edge. And the tides of the Bismarck Sea wash ashore the bodies of the men who were killed by Allied air power. Death has come to the soldier who 10 years before learned the goal of the Japanese warrior, victory or death. Bomb-shocked survivor is taken prisoner against his will. He must be tied down to prevent him from committing suicide. There is no greater disgrace than surrender. 10 years before, he had learned Bushido, the unbreakable code of the Japanese soldier. Victory or death. Never surrender. Thus, the New Guinea rainforest closes around the starving Japanese. 100,000 bypassed Japanese in New Guinea will eat their last meal and then die in the rainforests. Without food, without medicine, the blockaded Japanese perish in New Guinea. Each white box contains the remains of a Japanese soldier, sailor, or airman. The Japanese dead are being returned to the homeland. In a land where the military dominates the Japanese religion, the militarist has this explanation of death. In our struggle against the enemy's industrial resources, we must put our spirits and bodies against American steel. Death is necessary for victory. In a land where the military dominates the press, victory is worshipped and defeat is not mentioned. Only the highest officials know that Japan has been reversed at Midway and New Guinea. A spokesman of the General Staff says, "The only thing we fear is that the enemy will not come out to do battle. The Pacific is a Japanese lake through which we can travel with impunity." This is not solely boasting. In 1943, American propaganda has overplayed the Japanese defeats and underplayed the Japanese victories. For the Pacific is a Japanese lake. The Marianas are Japanese. The Philippines are Japanese. The Marshalls are Japanese. The Gilberts are Japanese. Only in New Guinea and the Solomons are the Allies resisting. Of all the Allied surface weapons, only one is sufficiently strong to venture into Japanese territory, the American aircraft carrier. Since Pearl Harbor and Midway, the aircraft carrier is the dominant silhouette of the seas.
An aircraft carrier is a landing strip moving at 30 knots into the wind. Carrier landing requires practice and skill. It takes teamwork between the pilots and the deck crew. Flaps down, arresting gear down, power on. Both eyes on the landing signal officer. The technique is to keep the nose high and the tail low so the tail hook will catch one of the wires stretched across the deck. There's a slot that leads down the center of the deck, and the landing signal officer's job is to see that you come up the groove. Pick up your wing. Set it down easy. Cut your power. Out of the groove, waved off. A little high, but within limits. Bad landing coming up. He bounces over the deck wires and hits the barrier that protects the aircraft parked forward. Farther down the deck, the plane directors do a ballet underneath the propellers of the parking airplanes. Not an inch of deck space can be wasted. Fold the wings. You're home.
November 1943. The Pacific Fleet is being ordered into its greatest offensive action to date. For 3 days, the big carriers lay to refueling. In safe waters, fuel oil, aviation gas, and supplies come aboard. Now from Hawaii and New Zealand, from San Diego, Pearl Harbor, Samoa, and Guadalcanal, the task force assembles. The whole armada covers 50 square miles of ocean. The fleet is steaming to an island of only 290 acres, Tarawa. Here is our objective, Tarawa and its airstrip. Control of Tarawa means control of the Gilbert Islands. Control of the Gilberts means bases from which we can invade the Marshalls. Control of the Marshalls means bases from which we can invade the Marianas. Control of the Marianas means bases from which we can attack Japan herself. This is the Central Pacific pattern. The center of the pattern is the American aircraft carrier. The planes are armed and ready. The Army Air Force has already bombed Tarawa. The naval carriers will finish the job. The naval pilots are told there is the suspicion the Japanese have abandoned Tarawa. Nevertheless, the bombing and shelling will far exceed anything ever done in the past. Never in the history of warfare will so much high explosive be dropped on so small an area. Against 290 Japanese acres, we launch 200 planes. Within 7 minutes, the few enemy planes on the airstrip are knocked out. The island is bombed, and the returning planes report no signs of life. Nevertheless, the fire control centers call for the first of 3,000 tons of naval shells. Yards from the beach. The Marines transfer to the landing craft. The run-in has been timed for high tide so that the heavier ships can sail over the coral reef. Yards. The first error is apparent. The tide is moving in the wrong direction. It is low tide, not high. But there's no answering fire from the beach. The island may be abandoned. 3,000 yards. The enemy is there. Yards. The Japanese are on Tarawa in great strength. "1,000 yards, low tide. The landing craft run aground on the coral below the waterline. There is nothing the trapped Marines can do but go ashore on foot. The troops wade to the beach line against increasing small arms fire. Yards. Some units cannot gain the beach. The small, narrow beachhead is only 20 yards at its deepest point. It is already too expensive. For the first time in the history of the United States Marines, this signal is sent. Issue in doubt. If the enemy mounts a counterattack, he will push us into the sea. On the second day, the 2nd Marine Division makes its move inland. The Navy has fired 3,000 tons of high explosive into 1/2 a mile of island. The carrier planes have flown 1,000 sorties. It still takes the flamethrower, the machine gun, the rifle, and courage. On the 4th day, Tarawa is secured. But the cost is heavy. A unit finds 6 men out of 10 have been wounded. 1 out of 8 lays dead on the beach. The battle for Tarawa is won.
Some men talked about Tarawa in terms of tactics. Some men talked in terms of how many sorties had been flown. Some said we should have done more bombing. Others said we needed more rockets, or we could have worked closer to the infantry. The facts were, and we knew it, that a lot of Marines were dead, but not one airman had died at Tarawa.
A new kind of carrier action is called for. The Japanese could not have built Tarawa into a fortress if they did not have a supply bastion deep in the Central Pacific. This supply point is the strongest Japanese position outside the home islands. If it can be neutralized, further invasions may not be so costly. The island is Truk. Truk is the Japanese Gibraltar. Truk supplies the Marshalls, the Marianas, the Carolines, New Guinea. Truk will not be invaded. Truk will be destroyed from the air. Japanese sound detectors pick up the American planes. The Japanese fighter strength on truck equals the incoming Americans. The Japanese Zero is the same plane used in the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Americans are flying a new fighter, the Hellcat. Slightly less maneuverable than the Zero, the Hellcat is more rugged and can outclimb and outdive the enemy. Once the American fighters have won supremacy, the dive bombers are sent in. The fighter victory is so overwhelming that not a single enemy plane challenges the dive bombers. The only resistance comes from the enemy's anti-aircraft guns. The white balls floating up lazily are Japanese anti-aircraft bullets. The enemy ships in the lagoon are in an impossible position. If they stay in truck, they have no protection. If they try to leave the harbor, the surface forces of the United States Navy are waiting to destroy them. In one day, naval air power sinks 200,000 tons of shipping.
Coming home. Some planes have been holed by flak. The formations are ragged. Some are low on gas. But most make it. He runs out of gas just short of the carrier. plane is thrown overboard to clear the flight deck.
The victory at Truk is not without cost. But after the American carrier strikes, the Japanese write off Truk as a naval base. The air in the Central Pacific has been cleared of enemy opposition. Now air power reaches to the west and to the north, toward the last islands, Japan. American B-24s, outbound to Truk, Wewak, Biak, the Carolines, the Marianas. Outbound to 100 places whose names Americans never knew before the war and have forgotten since the war. The B-24, a flying gas tank, not wanted in the European theater of operations because it handles like a truck and cannot easily be flown in formation. The B-24 sent to the Pacific because it has the longest range of any American airplane. Over the vast Pacific, range is essential.
Flag straight ahead. They're wide. Phosphorus 100 feet low. I'm clutched in. Estimate the target 30 seconds. Bombs away.
Truk, Wewak, Biak, the Carolines, the Marianas. The B-24 was not designed for this kind of bombing. It was built as a strategic weapon to bomb the enemy's home industries. But in the spring of 1944, we are 3,000 miles short of Japan. The long-range bomber is the tip of our offensive spear, the longest-reaching tactical weapon in our arsenal. The B-24 strikes at Japanese shipping, Japanese supply dumps, Japanese airfields, but not yet at Japan itself. Losses are never as high as Europe, but some planes will never return. Some men will never return. Some run short of gas and ditch in the Pacific. Some run into trouble and try to make it into the first field they see. Wheels up, coming into a fighter base where the runway is too short for a heavy bomber. Most make it home to airstrips bought in blood. Buna Mission, Bella Lavella, Ley, Munda, 100 places whose names have been forgotten. Most make it home to tropical heat, boredom, uneasiness, uncertainty. Most make it home to the bomber bases. This is the bomber line in May 1944. We hold parts of New Guinea and some of the islands in the Bismarck Sea. The bomber line threatens the Japanese positions in the Carolines. We hold the Solomons and the Gilberts. The bomber line protects our convoys to Australia. We hold bases in the Marshalls. The bomber line threatens Japanese positions in the Marianas. But there is a 3,000-mile gap between our bomber line and Japan. The logical step, the next chain of islands, the Marianas. In May of 1944, the Americans assemble an invasion fleet. A correspondent wrote,
"We have assembled 500 ugly ships and are loading them with 250,000 naval shells and more than 500,000 cubic feet of refrigerated foodstuffs. We are carrying railroad equipment for the narrow gauge railroad we expect to repair on Saipan. We've brought together 130,000 men and 10 million rounds of small arms. Saipan and the Marianas will fall because the percentages are all ours." But there's another percentage nobody talks much about. In 2 years of invading islands, we've learned that there will be slightly more than 1 American casualty for every 2 Japanese soldiers on the island. This means that 10,000 Americans of this group will be killed, wounded, or missing by the time Saipan is taken. 10,000 casualties at a minimum. That's what it will cost to advance the bomber line 1,000 miles.
The approach to battle takes 3 weeks. During the first days, poker, crap games, speculation, conversation. Later, the ships are quieter. Casual discussions disappear. Slowly, the tension relaxes. The sea is so vast that there seems no end to the voyage. It is so calm that danger seems remote.
All hands, now hear this. The destination of this task force is the Marianas. This unit is assigned to the invasion of Saipan. Our primary objective is the Aslito airfield. Resistance is expected to be heavy. Unit commanders will make known all particulars of the order of battle. That is all.
barrage continues for 2 days and nights. After the first hours, the effects of any bombardment must diminish. The enemy is either dead or hidden in fortified positions. Saipan is riddled with caves, and only a direct hit at the mouth of a cave can be effective. The fire is shifted to the shoreline to cover the first waves of American troops. The attack force, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions. The reserve force, the 27th Infantry Division.
Now it's all behind you. All the big ships, the big guns, the training, the planning, it's all behind you. You're all alone, and in the next 10 minutes you may be dead. All you have left in the world are the 12 men in your squad. What happens to them happens to you. You're going where they're going.
Japanese resistance begins. Not all the enemy's heavy guns have been knocked out. The Japanese begin to recover from the effects of the naval bombardment. Japanese artillery begins to find the range of the American landing craft. First waves land without too much difficulty. There is some disorganization because some units have landed in beaches not assigned to them. The move inland is delayed. The whole action is behind schedule. The Japanese have regrouped. They begin heavy fire against the beachhead. The American beachhead is 100 yards deep, but it is pinned to the sand and not moving. Some troops begin to dig in. If the assault waves dig in on the beach, they will be slaughtered by the enemy's mortars and artillery. But if the men get up, they will be in an exposed position. The issue is in balance. Everyone waits for the next man to move. Then one man takes command. The rest follow, and the Marines get up and go in.
Get up, move over that way!
As the Americans reach toward the first airfield, Japanese resistance between the beach and the first airstrip crumbles. The battlefield turns quiet. There are two possibilities. Either the enemy has decided not to defend the flat land surrounding Aslito Field, or he is drawing the Americans into an exposed position. The order of the day reads, advance with caution. Secure the airfield, but be prepared to withdraw if the Japanese counterattack. Aslito Airfield is taken. Heavy equipment comes ashore immediately. Tractors and bulldozers to clear away the wrecked Japanese equipment. Graders and sheep's foot rollers to lengthen the runway. Putting the equipment on shore so soon is a calculated risk. We are concentrating our material into a small area. A major counterattack could be disastrous. But a serviceable airstrip will permit American fighter planes to land. The airfield is our first objective, and we must take the risk. The Japanese prepare their counterattack. It is to be a maneuver without military meaning, but with great religious overtones to the Japanese themselves. A banzai charge, a suicide attack which will not end until the last Japanese is dead. The American lines waver, but the attack is beaten off. Now the infighting begins. The remaining Japanese are holed up in the caves of Saipan. They will not surrender. They must be burned in their caves. They will not surrender. They must be blown out of their caves by grenades. They will not surrender. They must be killed by small arms fire. The Japanese lose 32,000 men. The Americans take 16,000 casualties. We underestimated the number of Japanese on Saipan by 12,000. We underestimated how bitter the fight would be to extract the Japanese from the caves of Saipan. The Japanese suicide charge split the ranks of one division and led to heavy American casualties. On Saipan, 16,000 casualties. On Tinian, 2,500 casualties. On Guam, 10,000 casualties. Total casualties before the Marianas are secured, 28,000. Marianas are American. We took our losses so that we could build airstrips. We mourn our dead, hospitalize our wounded, and build airstrips. 28,000 feet of runways are being built. For each foot, one American casualty. There's no longer any need for combat men. The war is turned over to the machines. The battlefield is becoming an airfield. There's something special about the runways we are building. Their foundations are more than twice as thick as the runways of any bomber base ever built in the Pacific. Their width is half again as great as any strip we have ever built. A B-24 bomber can land in a mile of runway, but the bulldozers scratch out airstrips a mile and a half long. Only a handful of officers know why the extra half mile of runway is necessary. Then, in the skies above the island, a new airplane, the B-29. Inbound to Saipan, Tinian, Guam, the Marianas. Inbound, the superfortress, the highest, biggest, fastest bomber of the war. Inbound to take over the battle. This is an airplane built to fight the war in a new way. Not a tactical bomber, not a weapon to be used against the Japanese Army and Navy, but a strategic bomber built to destroy Japanese industry and the Japanese home islands. Now that the Marianas have been taken, strategic bombardment of Japan can begin. This is what the sacrifice of the foot soldier was for. This airplane will carry the burden of the war to Japan. This airplane will end World War II. The Emperor is troubled. The war is going badly. The Americans are in the Marianas, only 1,500 miles away. The High Command knows that Japan can no longer win the war, but they dare not admit the possibility of defeat. The home army numbers 2 million, and behind the strength of the Japanese military forces are the factories, the strategic heart of the Japanese war machine. By late summer 1944, Japanese effort is concentrated on preparations for defense. The apparently inevitable invasion is coming. The Japanese strategy is, let the Americans come. When the Americans invade, they will face so great a strength of weapons and men that no battle in history will be bloodier. This is the only strategic plan the Japanese have left. The strategic resources of the nation are concentrated for this purpose alone. The American Air Force also has a strategic plan. From the Marianas Islands, 1,500 miles to the southeast, throw an aerial and naval blockade around the home islands. From the Marianas, bomb the factories that make the tools of war. From the Marianas, destroy the Japanese capacity to make war. The Air Force hopes that an invasion of Japan will not be necessary, for the strategic weapon is at hand. In theory, this strategic bomber should settle the issue. In theory, we know just where the bomb should be placed. First priority, bomb the Japanese aircraft industry. Halt the manufacture of military planes. Establish air supremacy over Japan. Second priority, bomb Japanese port and urban industrial areas. Submarines will blockade Japan. B-29s will destroy the enemy's tools. This is the theory of strategic bombardment. These are the weapons. The 21st Bomber Command at Saipan is combat ready. Its first target, the Nakajima Aircraft Engine Plant, producing nearly 30% of all combat aircraft engines in Japan. For the first time since the Doolittle raid 2.5 years earlier, American bombers are flying a mission to Tokyo. November 1944, the first Superfort raid against Tokyo. The attitude of the command staff is one of confidence. Some opposition is expected from enemy fighters or flak, but casualties are expected to be light. The B-29 is especially designed for this kind of mission. It is the first very long-range, high-altitude precision bomber. The planes carry enough bombs to destroy the Nakajima plant on this single mission alone. 111 Superforts carrying a bomb load of over 500,000 pounds. The first wave of the strategic Pacific-based assault against Japan. The theory of continuous strategic bombardment in the Pacific is about to be tested. Hours out of the Marianas and still several hundred miles from Japan, the B-29s encounter a typically severe weather front and are forced to climb. The planes are unable to go above or around the storm. They must go through it. Some planes are driven so far off course that they miss Japan completely. Coming into the target, an unexpected obstacle. The B-29s are swept along by the fastest winds in any part of the world, a river of air called the jet stream. The winds increase the speed of the bombers by approximately 40%. The Superforts are moving too fast for accurate bombardment. The bombardiers cannot compensate for the wind speed. The target is obscured by clouds. Only 24 of the 111 bombers hit the target. Less than 20 tons of bombs fall into the target area. Most fall wide into the dock and urban areas and into Tokyo Bay. Japanese fighter defense is less effective than anticipated. Japanese planes dropped phosphorus bombs into the American formation. Only one Superfort is lost, rammed by a suicidal Japanese fighter. The score is even. Less than 1% loss to the attacking B-29s. less than 1% damage to the aircraft engine factory. The homeward flight is 1,500 miles. The bombers have expended their fuel reserves fighting the storm. The trip home is 5 hours of tension. There is an absolute minimum of fuel. 1,500 miles with no place to land, no place to jump, nothing but the Pacific below. By tank, the fuel gauges read empty. All tanks are almost dry when the Marianas come into view. The crippled planes come in first. The right outboard engine is feathered. During the next 3 months, this is how they will come home. Short of fuel, straining to make the runway. Although bombing results will improve, Japanese resistance will also increase. During the next 3 months, the number of ditchings increase. There is nothing wrong with the theory of strategic bombardment. There's nothing wrong with the Superfort. It is a rugged plane that can take battle damage which would down any other bomber. The men fly their missions, take their losses, and return when they can to the bomber bases. The men know the bombers need fighter escort over Japan. The crippled bombers need a refueling and repair point between the Marianas and Japan. With a refueling point, we could carry less gas and more bombs. Something must be done. 100 minor modifications are made in the Superforts. The orders come down the chain of command. The 7th Air Force and all available bombers of the 20th Air Force are ordered to bomb a new target, Iwo Jima. It is 1,500 miles from the Marianas to Japan. Halfway between the Marianas and Japan is a small island, Iwo Jima. For 72 days previous to the invasion, the bombers will strike the island. Then 61,000 Marines will take Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima is only 8 square miles of volcanic ash and rock dominated by Mount Suribachi. It has only 2 assets, It is 700 miles closer to Tokyo. It has 3 airfields. Marines are told to expect a 3 or 4 day battle. The Navy will deliver a 3-day barrage preceding the landings. But the Marines are veterans of island warfare. They know the Japanese tactics. The enemy will be underground, hidden in caves. The enemy will be protected by thick-walled concrete fortifications. The Marines know they will take Iwo as they have taken other islands, by individual combat. The last religious service aboard ship before D-Day. D-Day, February 19th, 1945. Answering fire from the shore. The first waves of Marines land unopposed. They cross the island at its narrowest point. Then the enemy opens fire. Naval and aerial bombardment have caused little damage to the enemy's fortifications. Japanese artillery and mortars are zeroed in on every foot of the island. By noon, it is apparent that this will be the costliest battle in Marine history. By noon, casualties in some battalions are as high as 25%. The surface ships are called on to support the Marines. The vessels move almost to the shore to fire point blank into the Japanese positions only yards from the attacking Marines. A tank attack fails. There is no room for maneuver, for flanking attacks, for deception. There's only one order: move straight ahead. Take the losses and get it over quickly. It cannot be done quickly. The enemy is too well entrenched. On the fifth day, the Marines take Mount Suribachi. "21 days later, Iwo Jima is officially declared secure. The 8 square miles of Iwo Jima cost 19,000 Marine and Navy wounded, 6,800 Marine and Navy dead. The price is fantastic, but the price had to be paid. From now until the war ends, some 2,400 crippled planes will make emergency landings at Iwo. $25,000 American flyers who might not have returned to the Marianas will be saved because the Marines took Iwo Jima. The first crippled superforts land even before the concrete surface has been laid. After Iwo is taken, Japan is doomed. Strategic bombardment will end the war. It is early 1945. Japanese contradictions are apparent even on the surface. Old isolationist Japan mingles with modern expansionist Japan. The Japanese are costumed in 2 contradictory attitudes: progress and isolation. Japan has become the most industrialized nation of the East, the 4th largest industrial country of the world. Its whole war machine runs on an industrial base. And yet material weapons of the war mean little. The strategic heart of Japan may sustain her war effort, but a Japanese spokesman says, and the country believes, that the weapons of war are nothing more than the extension of the medieval samurai sword. But some members of the American military have the mistaken belief that if the strategic heart of Japan is bombed out, Japan, without the weapons of war, must surrender. Japanese defenses are inadequate to stop the Americans. This is Western war in an Eastern setting. The American bombers are attempting to repeat the pattern of the European war. High altitude, daylight precision bombardment. The bombs are aimed solely at Japanese industrial and strategic targets. Japanese heavy industry is often housed in wooden buildings. Although not many incendiaries are used, from the beginning it is evident that firefighting equipment is inadequate. Daylight precision bombardment is first attempting to destroy the Japanese aircraft industry. Vast as the wreckage is, daylight bombing is not yet decisive, even in American terms. In the traditional Japanese terms, it means even less. The Minister of War has written, "Inadequacy of strength is not our worry. Why should we worry about that which is only material?" The few American planes which are shot down in this period are not frightening to the Japanese spirit. Instead, they are symbols of American cowardice. They carry too many guns, say the Japanese. They carry too many weapons of defense. These massive American bombers are loaded with precautions and safety devices. The Americans do not understand that this is a struggle between life or death. There is no middle ground, such as surrender or safety. It is evident from these crashed planes that the Americans have an overwhelming material superiority. It is also clear that a strong spiritual weapon will be needed to hold off the Americans' material advantage. Thus, the Japanese reach into their medieval past and tie an old concept to air power. The Japanese Army and Navy airmen are asked to commit controlled suicide. The code of suicide came from a sect of ancient Shinto warriors called samurai. According to this code, called Bushido, the ultimate act of violence was not murder, but suicide. Ceremonial suicide was to be judged not as an act of weakness, but as an act of the greatest moral strength. Volunteers are requested for special suicide squadrons. It is explained to the Japanese airmen that if they dive into American planes and ships, the weak American spirit will be broken. The United States cannot withstand the heavy losses which suiciders alone can inflict on the Americans. All those who commit suicide will preserve order, defeat anarchy, defend the emperor, advance 2 military ranks, and above all, will have an assured place in the temple of Japanese warriors, the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo. Some pilots will go out with less than 1 total day of flying experience. All that is necessary is to know how to control the plane and how to dive into American planes and ships. They are taught only the rudiments of evasive tactics. The divine weapon is ready. The contradictory weapon, the weapon of suicide to preserve order, stands waiting on Japanese airfields. "1,500 miles to the southeast, in the Marianas Islands, the Americans are readying an attack. The United States is preparing to seize Okinawa, less than 400 miles from the Japanese home islands. If the Americans cannot understand the Japanese, we are equally incomprehensible to the enemy. The American myth is that human life is so precious that all fighting must be done so far as possible with machines and supplies. Men will be risked only as a last resort. Our national material standard is mass production, and we have produced a mass of equipment beyond anything the world has ever seen. The only debate is, how shall all of this be used? If the European war is to be duplicated, we will have to make an amphibious landing on Japan proper. In the final analysis, runs the orthodox argument, the American foot soldier will have to meet the Japanese foot soldier. Machines and materiel can take us only so far. The most controversial weapon of war is the B-29 Very Long-Range Bomber. Strategic bombing fits the American myth perfectly. A maximum of destruction to the enemy with a minimum of risk to ourselves. The Marianas are covered with B-29s, but strategic bombardment has been only moderately successful. Weather, distance, navigation, all these factors are working against the B-29. The orthodox argument runs, strategic bombardment did not end the war in Europe. It will not end the war in Japan. In March 1945, the American Air Force turns its back on its traditions. If the B-29s cannot end the war with high-altitude, daylight explosive bombardment, another plan will be put into operation. The B-29s are ordered to go in at night, not daylight. At 7,000 feet, not 30,000 feet. With incendiaries, not high-explosive bombs. All armament, all weight-consuming defensive measures are to be taken out of the planes. All the things which made the B-29 a high-altitude bomber are to be removed. They will go in at low altitude, crammed to the weight limit with incendiary bombs. 300 B-29s are to be risked in a billion-dollar gamble. Not only the planes and the careers of the commanders are put on the line, the lives of 3,000 airmen are at stake. This is the biggest gamble the American Air Force has ever taken. These are the reasons we took the gamble. The Japanese air raid defenses are particularly weak. Japanese early warning system is 5 years behind time. Japanese radar is inadequate. The enemy must rely on sound detectors and searchlights rather than radar. The enemy has practically no night-flying interceptors, and his anti-aircraft guns will be inaccurate at night. Most of all, the Japanese cities are fire traps. March 9th, 1945, the worst fire in the history of the world consumes Tokyo. In one night, an area the size of Manhattan is burned to the ground. In one night, 1 million people are burned out of their homes. In one night, more people are killed than the atomic bomb will kill at Hiroshima. Night after night, the B-29s burn out Japan. Tokyo, Kobe, Osaka, Nagoya. The Japanese cities, one by one, go up in smoke. The whole nation is on the edge of panic. Minister of Home Affairs says there is no defense against these raids. To the Japanese, it is the end of the world. If the world is ending, then suicide. If the Japanese cannot entertain the possibility of surrender and the accepted means of defense are inadequate, then suicide. Each pilot is given his ceremonial belt. On this robe, worn beneath the flight suit, are the symbols of Bushido, the ultimate code of the samurai warrior. Is now off Okinawa. These planes will find their way to the ships. The United States Navy is off Okinawa, supporting the invasion of the island. These ships are within range of the kamikaze. Radar has picked up large formations of Japanese planes. The fleet reinforces its combat air patrols. The Japanese divide their forces. Their best pilots are to engage the American combat patrols. Once the American planes are engaged, a second wave of suicide pilots are to crash into the American ships. At this stage of the war, even the best Japanese pilots are no longer a match for the Americans. On the waiting ships, it is evident that the American planes cannot knock down all of the Japanese fighters. By sheer weight of numbers, the enemy must break through. The Japanese fly second-rate planes, but their determination to die makes them first-rate pilots. The kamikaze concentrate on the American aircraft carriers. The flat tops are a prize well worth 100 suicides. suiciders prefer night attacks. They prefer moonlight and low-level runs. The American aircraft carrier, backbone of our fleet, is the prime target for the Japanese suicide pilots. For if the enemy can knock out the aircraft carriers, the whole United States fleet will be without air protection, and the invasion of Okinawa may fail. For 82 days, the battle off Okinawa continues. For 82 days, the American fleet fights to hold its positions. In 1,900 Japanese pilots choose deliberately to die, and in their death frenzy, they wound the American fleet. 10,000 American sailors are wounded or killed by the suicide attacks. Okinawa cost the American Navy more lives than any battle of the war. Okinawa cost the American Navy more ships than any battle of the war. 164 vessels sunk or damaged. 8 aircraft carriers are struck. We will take our losses, but we will take Okinawa. The enemy has struck back. The 16th century code of the samurai, Bushido, and kamikaze has pierced the Americans' 20th century defenses. This is what we must expect if we attempt to invade Japan. For the Japanese have 5,000 suicide pilots waiting in reserve, waiting for the Americans to attempt the invasion of Japan. June 1945. The last chapter begins. We have won aerial supremacy over the skies of southern Japan. The island of Kyushu, southernmost of the Japanese home islands, is completely vulnerable to land-based fighter attack. This is what aerial supremacy means. Rail traffic in Kyushu is all but stopped. The few industrial plants that have not been bombed are machine gunned and rocketed. Japan is so short of oil that when her fighters are strafed, there is no gasoline to explode. Already restricted by the submarine campaign of the United States Navy and by Air Force minefields, Japanese shipping lays to in harbor anchorage. The Japanese ships cannot move even in interior waters. But it is by night, by incendiary, and by fire that defeat becomes inevitable. The cities of Japan are wooden fire traps, bamboo buildings that burn like paper. The major cities of Japan are put to the magnesium torch. The worst fires of history burn unchecked. Nine million people are burned out of their homes. 750,000 Japanese are killed or wounded by the air raids. An official of the Ministry of the Interior writes, "The people in general are abandoning the war as the incendiary attacks of the B-29s become more severe. The whole nation is on the edge of panic. There is no defense against the fires. In spite of the assurances of Radio Tokyo, the nation can see there is no defense against the American bomber." As the ruins cool, the nation can see that Japanese heavy industry lies twisted and ruined. The military economy of Japan has come to a halt. In the face of this destruction, the Japanese diplomats secretly ask Russia, Sweden, and Switzerland to arrange peace between Japan and the United States. But fanatic elements of the Japanese military vow they will kill any government official who talks peace. The negotiations move slowly. The military, through its control of the press, keeps the Japanese people ignorant of the conferences that are being held to find a way out with honor. Honor dictates that until the emperor speaks, Japan will continue to resist. The incidence of disease begins to rise. Malnutrition, typhoid, pneumonia sweep over Japan. Until the emperor speaks, Japan will continue to resist. On July 7th, 1945, the Emperor of Japan personally requests that the war be ended as soon as possible. His language is vague, and the military does not choose to interpret it as a command to surrender, but as a command to win the war. The Japanese military does not consider its case hopeless. The Army has 2 million frontline troops for the defense of the home islands. The military knows it cannot win the war. It hopes that by using suicide as a weapon, it can inflict so many casualties on the Americans that terms favorable to the Japanese will be offered. Suicide as a weapon. The Japanese Air Forces have 5,000 first-line planes in reserve. These and all other planes and pilots are expendable in kamikaze attacks. 1,900 suicide planes have been used to maul the American fleet off Okinawa. As the hysteria grows, more pilots volunteer for suicide duty. Thus, in July of 1945, the Japanese are torn between military fanatics who demand national suicide and an impotent civil government which cannot decide how to arrange surrender. The Americans are also facing a great debate, equally secret. Within the councils of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Navy and Air Force argue that given enough time, the sea blockade and aerial bombardment of Japan will end the war. But the Army feels that an invasion must take place. The Army's opinion prevails. Thus, the Joint Chiefs of Staff draw up and mark top secret Olympic Coronet, the plan to invade Japan. The first stage of the plan, Operation Olympic, November 1st, 1945. The American 6th Army and the 5th Marine Corps will invade Kyushu, the southernmost of the Japanese home islands. The second stage of the plan, Operation Coronet. 4 months later, March 1st, 1946, the American 8th and 10th Armies, landing at a point near the plain of Tokyo, will invade Honshu, the largest of the Japanese home islands. Olympic Coronet involves great risks. Our intelligence agents have told us that the Japanese are waiting for the attack. At best, there will be only local surprise. Should an American fleet appear off the coast of Japan, it will be vulnerable to suicide attacks. The bitter memory of the destruction caused by the kamikaze attacks off Okinawa haunts the American Navy. The Navy will support the invasion if it is so ordered, but all hands know that we may lose many ships even before the landing force is launched. Should a landing force be launched, we must repeat the same bloody pattern that began at Guadalcanal in 1942 and has continued throughout the Pacific. Troops like these have assaulted the Marshalls, the Gilberts, the Marianas. Troops like these have taken Saipan, Iwo, and Okinawa. A pattern has been set. There is no escaping it. The landing on Japan will be more difficult by far than any landing we have made to date. As at Iwo and Okinawa, we may be able to force our way onto the beaches, but it is certain that a great struggle will take place on shore. We must expect to take heavy casualties. The ratio has been 1 American casualty for every 2 Japanese defenders. Thus far in the Pacific, we have taken 300,000 casualties. As we have come closer to Japan, our casualties have increased. The American Secretary of War estimates that the cost of invading Japan and conquering the home islands may be 1 million American casualties. This is what Olympic Coronet may cost. 1 million American casualties. Olympic Coronet may be the bloodiest battle in American history. Tinian, 1,500 miles southeast of Japan. The island is covered by B-29s. There are over 400 heavy bombers on the island. Day by day, the bombers are armed with high explosive and incendiary bombs. Until the invasion begins, the bombers will continue the aerial offensive. On one corner of the island, a special group of planes, the 509th Bomb Group. The planes of the 509th have been radically changed on the interior. There's nothing externally significant about this bomb group, but it is virtually sealed off from the rest of the Air Force. The 509th is not sent into the mass formations that bomb Japan daily. The group is ordered to fly a few missions to Japan, but never with the rest of the Air Force. The 509th flies only minor missions, and its formations never number over 6 planes. The planes are armed with high explosives. They sometimes carry a single 10,000-pound bomb of peculiar shape. Only one man of the group knows what lies ahead. The 509th suffers no casualties and its few missions cause only negligible damage. August 6, 1945. The 509th Bomb Group has a major mission. The first atomic bomb is placed in the bomb bay of an American B-29. If the plane crashes on takeoff, there is some danger that the atomic bomb will explode and kill everything on the island of Tinian. Thus, the bomb is put into the bomb bays disassembled. The bomb is extremely heavy. On a previous night, 4 B-29s carrying an almost equal weight have crashed on takeoff. Directly after takeoff, the technician charged with arming the atomic weapon climbs into the bomb bay and begins to reassemble the bomb. Since the plane is to maintain strict radio silence, there will be no way of knowing until the bomb is dropped whether or not the weapon has been fused properly. Hiroshima. Earlier in the morning, there has been one air raid alert, but the all clear has sounded. Bombardier is not to bomb by radar. The city must be visible to the bombardier's eye. The weather over Hiroshima, clear. The bomb run lasts exactly 4 minutes, 8:11 to 8:15, Hiroshima's time. Dead, 80,000. Wounded, 80,000. At first, the Japanese do not know what has hit them. They can see that most wounds come from blast and heat. The Japanese do not understand the symptoms of radiation sickness. One plane has carried a bomb equal to that of more than 2,000 bombers carrying conventional weapons. One plane has carried a bomb equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. After Hiroshima, the Americans will not lose 1 million men in an invasion of Japan. After Hiroshima, Japanese fanaticism will crumble. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Emperor will demand that Japan be surrendered. September 2nd, 1945. 11 men representing the defeated Empire of Japan arrive aboard the battleship Missouri to surrender their country. For the Allied powers, General Douglas MacArthur.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
For the Japanese government, Mamoru Shigemitsu. For the Japanese military, General Yoshijiro Umetsu.
The Supreme Commander for the Allied powers will now sign on behalf of all the nations at war with Japan. Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign?
Wainwright, who had surrendered Corregidor in 1942. Percival, who surrendered Singapore in 1942. The night previous, General Umetsu and other members of the Japanese delegation had threatened to commit suicide rather than sign the surrender document. The Emperor's intervention had forced them to stay alive. "20 minutes after it began, it was all over.
These proceedings are closed.
The ceremony had ended. The killing had ended. The war had ended, but in a manner which neither side had expected.